Next, um, just real quickly, again, this was working with watercolor in a couple different ways. Dry on dry, wet on dry, also wet on dry on top of a pigment, wet on wet, wet on wet, and wet on dry for those good sharp, uh, well-defined lines. Next thing I'm going to go over is watercolor pencils because these are really, really cool. I love playing with them. Um, I don't use them all the time, but sometimes, like I said, when I'm drawing out in nature, and these are really convenient to carry in my pocket, and I can just do some sketching. Or in a watercolor painting that I'm trying to do, maybe there's some really super tight places I want to try to get into, or I want a real sketchy kind of quality to the piece. Um, Watercolor pencils are going to do a great job. Now the way these work, like I said before, they're like color pencils, right? But the pigment inside is watercolor. So I can actually come down on this paper and just draw, just like this. Then I take a brush with some good clean water, and as I apply my water to it, you're going to see that this is starting to turn into paint now. Right, so now it doesn't look anything like a color pencil anymore. Now it's become watercolor paint. There's a couple of really neat things that we can do with them. The harder that you push, the more difficult it is for it to dissolve back into its paint. So I can draw really, really lightly, like this, and and I know when I add my water to it, it's going to become very smooth area of paint. Or I can push really hard with the pencil, like this, and then I know that the pigment is going to be really dark, but some of these pencil strokes are not going to disappear when I make it wet. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to take my water, and on these light areas, right, those pencil lines just disappear pretty much because that pigment just melts into the paper. I get down into here, and it's going to be much darker amount of pigment, right? But if we look really closely, let's see if I can get this. You can see, hopefully, that there are still some pencil strokes that are showing through here. So you can actually use that to your advantage if you want. You know, you can use that if you want that texture. Maybe you want to lay down the watercolor, but you want that texture to show through of your pencil strokes. Then you just push really, really hard on here. But this works really great. So let's say for instance, I'm just going to do something really, really tiny here, just to show you. Like, let's say I'm out in the field and I want to draw. I'm looking and I see a tree, right? So I've got a tree here. Maybe it's got some rough bark like this. It's winter, so it's kind of a dead tree. Like this, right? So I've drawn this tree, and I'm just drawing just like with a pencil. And so it is really natural for me. I can actually make some of these places much darker if I wanted to indicate shadow, just like I might do with a pencil. All right? Maybe then I've got some grass. Where this tree is, I can lay some sketchy pigment along the ground here. Maybe there's even a little indication of some sky and clouds. Right, so I've just laid down brown and green and blue with my watercolor pencil. Then I can take this home, back to the studio, and I can get in here and I can start to make this then into a little watercolor painting, just like this. And that paint is just going to dissolve back down. I can add more water to it, just like I can with a regular watercolor paint. Move this around, do some blending, maybe my sky. So again, if I want that sky to be really soft, I would lay down that watercolor pencil in the sky with really soft lines, and then I know it's all going to dissolve. If I want some places where, like in the grass, some texture showing through, I might draw with heavier lines like this and get that to remain as the texture there. Right? Then I can come in and again dissolve this paint in my tree. And just make a nice little watercolor painting like this. Now this is really simple. These aren't the colors that I would probably use. I'd make much more complex colors, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about here. So I can get, a real detailed little drawing, and then come in with water and just make that into a watercolor. All right, the next couple of things I want to show us, and these are kind of fun little tricks for watercolor, is I'm going to use some masking fluid. And masking fluid looks like this. Basically what it is, it's a liquid latex, so it's rubber. And when it dries, it's rubber. Okay? So what I'm going to do is open this thing up, and it stinks because the vehicle inside of it is ammonia, and that's what keeps the rubber liquid until it dries. So that ammonia is pretty stinky. I'm going to take a brush, and I'm going to do some of this, and then I'll move on to something else because it takes a moment for it to dry. So I'm going to lay down just a little bit of this latex, masking fluid. I'm just going to make some different textures here just so you can see how this is going to work. I'll also go ahead and do some on some areas up here where I've already painted. Maybe I'll do that, right? So, like right here. Now you can just barely see it, but there is enough tone to it that you can see where you're putting it. When it dries, it's really hard to see, but that's okay because I'm going to show you how this works later. Now you want to not use a really great brush for this because once this rubber dries inside in the brush, it'll be ruined. So I'm going to try to wash this out as soon as I can. But in any case, I would never use like a really great brush, like a very expensive brush for this because you don't want to ruin it. Okay, while that's drying, I'm going to show you another technique where we add salt to our watercolor just to add some texture to it. So here, I'm going to mix up some pigment. Come over to my paint. Just mixing up some paint. And salt is a natural desiccant, which means it absorbs moisture. All right, so if your cell phone gets wet, you put it in rice or salt, and it'll suck up the moisture. And it's going to do the same thing on the watercolor page too. So I'm going to lay down some pigment here. And while this is still wet, Okay, I'm going to take some salt like this, and I'm just going to sprinkle it. And you want to practice this off to the side, and just so you get used to how much salt to put down, because every kind is going to be different. And you can already see how it's starting to get this really interesting texture on here. But let me show you how this works. Let's see. Well, here's a great example, right? Remember, I showed you this drawing in class, this painting in class. I have this beautiful pound cake here that I was trying to draw, and I wanted to get the texture of that pound cake with all those little tiny little pockets in it, but I didn't want to paint these thousands of little tiny dots. So what I did was I laid down some watercolor, and then I sprinkled salt on it. And then when this salt dries completely, I can brush it off, and I'm going to end up with this really interesting texture. Now this is something that it takes a little while. So again, I'm going to let this dry. I'm going to come back, and we'll have another quick video showing how all of these things work out when we're using them. Okay.